Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to be speaking to you in English because if I speak in Chinese, most of you won't understand me. The Chinese is that bad. So, apologies for that. Today I'm going to be talking to you about junk men and junk women. And I think we all know in our heads sort of what that means, and we could find them anywhere we look in Shenzhen. We could walk out of this theater, and with 100 meters, 200 meters, we'd find people collecting junk off the streets. That's what I do. That's what I write about. For the last 15 years, many of them spent in China, I have traveled the world learning about, talking to, spending time with, writing about, interviewing junk men and junk women. Along the way, I've learned quite a few interesting things about junk. I've learned quite a few interesting things about China and India and Ghana and Kenya and the United States. And I've also learned quite a few interesting things about myself. So we'll talk about those as well. The way I like to talk about junk is to tell stories about it. So I'm going to tell you a story about the guy on the left. He's the one holding the big hat. His name is Abe Leader. This photo was taken in about 1915, and I've actually shown this photo before, and people sometimes say I kind of look like Abe, and we'll get to that in a little bit. This photo was taken in southern Russia at a time when Abe was much less wealthy than he looks in this photo. Abe had no education. He was illiterate. He didn't have any connections at all, and he also had another big problem. In southern Russia at this time, it was very bad to be Jewish. The Russian government, the Tsar, the communists were really cracking down on Jews, and Abe was Jewish. So he said, I'm going to move to the United States, and I'm going to become an entertainer, a song and dance man, a guy who goes on stage in theaters and does his thing and makes millions of dollars. Abe made one big mistake, though. Instead of taking a boat to New York City, which is where you want to be an entertainer, he took a boat to Texas. And that doesn't work very well because in Texas, in Galveston, Texas, where he landed, it's an industrial city, not much opportunity for entertainers. So now think about this. 1915, 1916, Russian guy, no English, no education, no connections, landing in Texas. What are you going to do? Well, the only thing you can do is start picking up garbage from the streets and selling it. And that's what Abe did because he had no other options. So he started out picking rags, cloth off the street. People threw away rags in those days. Now you think, is there any value in a rag and a cloth and a dirty old cloth? In fact, there is. You could go and sell it to a paper mill because paper mills make rags into new paper. And once he started doing that, he started seeing other things. You could pick up bones and sell them to people who are making glue. You could pick up cans and sell them to people who are making new metal. Anything that he could find that had value in it, that other people didn't see the value in, he would take and he would make money from. Now, he was not the only guy who did this. At this time in the United States, around 90% of the population that did junking, who went and collected junk off the streets, were people like Abe. They were illiterate Jewish immigrants. Why did they do it? Because they couldn't do anything else. Now, this is not Abe. I've asked his family if they have pictures of him doing his job. They don't, but I found this photo from a historical society, and this basically is what Abe would do. He'd have a backpack, or he'd have a cart like this, and he'd walk around and he'd pick up junk. Now, it should look familiar to people in this room. We've all seen this. Even though this is 100 years ago, if you go up to Shanghai, where I lived for many years, there you go. We do it here too, yeah? There's no difference. Here it is in 1915 in New York City. Here it is last year in Shanghai. Again, it's funny, you know, when we look at the junk people in China, we oftentimes think this is a China thing. Or maybe if you go to India and people say, well, this is an India thing. Or if you go to Kenya and they'll say this is a Kenya thing. In fact, this is an economic thing. If you have an open economy, there are people who make their living doing this. And I want to point out this particular gentleman who's pulling this along, he was a lot like Abe. He was from Anhui, and he's in Shanghai. Well, do I need to tell you, if you're from Anhui and you're going to Shanghai, it's going to be tough because you don't speak Shanghai Hua. You don't have maybe a lot of education, and you certainly don't have any connections. So what are you going to do? You're going to do like Abe and scrap. All right, second story. The gentleman in the striped shirt is a friend of mine by the name of Raymond Lee. Raymond lives in Qingyuan, which is north of here, a few hours, in northern Guangdong. Many of you might know it. The woman next to him is his wife, and on both sides are two of his cousins. Raymond also is in the junk business, and he got into the junk business in the 1990s, early 1990s. He was born in Qingyuan. It's not how he started out in the junk business. He was born in Qingyuan. He had very little education, just the normal education, very few connections, and so his first job was working in a chemical and paint factory. And he worked there until he was 27 years old. And when he turned 27, he said, you know what? I want to be rich and famous. So he did the natural thing. He went into the junk business. Now, generally, you don't get rich and famous in junk, but if you're in Qingyuan around early 1990s, 91, 92, what other options are you going to have? And he started out very, very small. Now, how do you do junk in Qingyuan in the early 1990s? Well, there was an interesting thing happening. Lots of smart businessmen in Qingyuan said, Guangdong doesn't have many raw materials. It doesn't have steel. It doesn't have copper, any of these things. And if you want to get these, if you're a small businessman and you want 500 kilos of steel, you can't call up Bao Steel and say, hey, send me 500 kilos of steel. That number doesn't exist. So they brought in scrap metal, like this. Now, what are these? I think some people in the room might know what these are. These are electric motors, and everybody in this room owns some of these. They may not be as big. Electric motors are in your washing machine. They're what makes things spin around. If you use an electric razor to shave in the morning, there's a little motor turning things around. If you own an amusement park and you have a Ferris wheel spins because you have an electric motor in it. The problem is they're very difficult to recycle because when you recycle, you need to separate things. So in an electric motor, you have copper, and that's the orange stuff you see, the orange metal, and you have steel. If you want to recycle it, you need to split them in half. Well, the United States has millions and millions and millions of electric motors, but the labor in the United States is too expensive to recycle them. So in the 1980s and 1990s, they piled up until some very smart Chinese businessmen said, hey, what if we import these into China, recycle them there, and then we've got cheap copper and steel. Well, Raymond started out buying small amounts of electric motors like these and bringing them home, and his family would break them apart, and they would sell them. The other thing he'd do is they would buy wire. So what is wire? It's copper and plastic. Now, one way wire would be recycled is you set it on fire, and then you burn away all the plastic. But the better way to do it is what you see here, is you can use a razor, and you cut the insulation, the plastic off, and you have copper and plastic. And you can sell the copper to anybody. It can be made into telephones, it can be made into televisions, it can be made into very nice cooking pots, anything you want. And the plastic can be also used. One of the places that Raymond sells his plastic to, they make shoe soles out of it. So it's very useful. All right. And over time, Raymond got very wealthy. Now, this may look like a lot of garbage to you. But in today's terms, this shipping container full of copper is worth about 25,000 US dollars. Not cheap. And Raymond reached the point in the mid-2000s where he was capable of importing as many as 40 or 50 containers of these into southern China every month. And what would happen? His people would recycle it, and they'd sell it to manufacturers all over China, but especially in the south, who would make it into things like phones, televisions, cookingware. It was China's source of raw materials. In fact, by 2002, the number one export from the US and Europe to China was this, scrap metal. And it wasn't because it was garbage, it was because it had value. Raymond saw in this what Abe Leader saw in this. He saw something that Americans didn't value very much, that Germans or Japanese didn't value very much, and he could take to China and make into something better. All right. Let's go back to Abe Leader for a moment. This is a picture taken in 1947 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Abe Leader also grew his business from very small beginnings. You know, he started out with a backpack and then the cart. And he didn't have China's growth to benefit him. You know, Raymond got rich because China grew and needed lots and lots of raw materials. Abe had something just as good, though. He had World War II. So, you know, in 1938, 37, he was struggling. And then the United States got into the war, and all of a sudden the United States needed lots of metal. And Abe knew where to get that metal. And so recyclers in the United States grew very, very, very wealthy and very, very big. In this photo, you see cranes. Abe had 5 of those. You see a truck with his name on it, Leader Brothers. I don't know how many of those he had. His family can't tell me. But it was a very, very profitable time for Abe, and he grew a very nice business. And like Raymond Lee's business, it was a family business. So here is Abe's family. This was taken a couple years before Abe died in 1966. Abe is the guy in the back with the funny hair. But look what he did. He has this beautiful family, this big business in the United States, and everybody worked in the business. The woman below him to the right, his daughter Betty, that's his middle daughter, she told me that even though he got big, he'd had a successful business, he still sort of had the small junk guy sort of mentality, way of thinking. So when there would be a wedding or a birthday and he wanted to hire a caterer or do something special, he would send his children into the house where he kept a secret store of scrap metal, and he would make them clean up the scrap metal so he could sell it to pay the caterer, even once he got very wealthy. That was just kind of his way of thinking. Now, below Betty, you see sort of the pudgy little fellow there. That's her oldest son, Michael. Michael grew up to be in the business as well, because these become family businesses that go on and on. And you will see a picture of Michael here. This is Michael in Minneapolis. He grew into a very large recycling business that exports lots and lots of metal to China. Now, I'm standing with him, and if you look at me and Michael, you may notice a little bit of a family resemblance. That's my father, okay? People oftentimes ask me, what kind of person comes from the junk business, goes into the junk business? Right here, somebody who gives a talk at Ishi, somebody who works for Bloomberg, somebody who writes books. I worked in the business too. This was the part of the business I worked in. It's not exactly a playpen. What did I do? Well, the worst job for me when I was a young kid working in the scrapyard was weighing aluminum cans, beer cans. What my father would do is every Monday morning, he would send me over here, and you would have lots of people coming to our business with their cans from the weekend, beer cans. They were partying all weekend, having a good time, drinking lots of beer, and they would bring them in garbage bags. And it was my job to stand there, take the bags from the drunk people, because some of them were still drunk on Monday morning, weigh them, and then give them their weight, and they would go inside and get paid. This is a terrible job for a number of reasons. One, you're dealing with drunks, never fun. Two, it's hot in the summer, because I only did this job in the summer, and it stunk so bad. I still won't drink beer. It's just the worst smell you've ever had in the middle of summer. Three, the bees, because old beer attracts bees, so I would get stung doing this. And honestly, if there was a reporter from the New York Times who'd come and seen this, he'd call it a human rights violation, And somebody from China would probably come and try and set up an NGO to save children like me. My father would then tell him, get out of our business, he's busy working. Because that's what it is, it's work. It's a way of working. But that was how I grew up. That's the kind of thing I did. And it was a pretty good business for us, and it still is, and it's a pretty good business for the people who do it in China and the United States. I'm only going to show you one chart today. This is it. So this is the value of Chinese scrap that's imported, brought into China from between 2000 and 2014. So the 2014 total is 27 billion US dollars, and that's probably low. That's probably low. Let me give you some perspective on that. That year, 2014, China exported less than $27 billion worth of clothing. It's a bigger business for China importing this than exporting clothing. And we all think of China as a big clothing exporter. Now, I have to be fair, in the last year and a half, because of the slowdown in China, these numbers have come down a little bit, by about 15%, but it's still an enormous business. And it's good for China, and it's good for the U.S., because the U.S. doesn't know what to do with all this stuff. And Chinese people look at it, smart Chinese business people look at it and say, oh, we'll take that off your hands, we'll bring it to our country, we'll make money off it. Works for them. All right. Now, one of the real pleasures of doing my job, because I decided not to go into the business. One thing I learned is family business. I prefer the family side to the business. If you put family business together, the family doesn't always get along. So I stuck with family and became a journalist. But I still like to write about the industry. And one of the things I really enjoy doing is going around the world and looking for different kinds of things and figuring out how they're recycled. One of the things that I really wanted to figure out, I'd seen it as a young man at our family scrapyard, is what happens to Christmas tree lights. The lights like you see on this tree right here. I wanted to know, how do they get recycled? Because I knew China was importing millions of kilos of American Christmas tree lights every year. So what were they doing with them? Well, I started looking around and I started asking friends who do this business. They say, oh yeah, we send it to China, but we don't know what they do with it. You can go to a scrapyard. This is taken at a U.S. scrapyard in Ohio. And you can see there's Christmas tree lights in there, and there's also a bit of Christmas tree in there as well. They're exporting this to China. What are they doing with it in China? They couldn't tell me. Then this is in North Carolina. That's a lot of Christmas tree lights. That's about 4 tons worth of Christmas tree lights. And the Chinese gentleman you see to the left of it is a friend of mine. He's actually a Chinese guy who goes to the United States, drives around the United States, going from junkyard to junkyard to junkyard, buying the scrap, sending it to China, and making his money that way. Well, he's a friend of mine, and he said, why don't you come with me? We'll go and look at some scrap, and I'll show you where all the Christmas tree lights are going. So he took me to the scrapyard in North Carolina, and we stood there, and we talked, and he says, okay, if you really want to see how this is done, you have to go visit my friend in Qingyuan. I said, yes, please, send me. So he did. So when I got back to Shanghai, I made a reservation, flew down to Qingyuan, and these are the people who I met. Now, this is actually Raymond Lee's family and a couple of his friends. This is how I met Raymond, because he's in the Christmas tree light recycling business. And, you don't just show up in China and say, show me your Christmas tree light recycling factory. That's not going to fly. You got to go to lunch, have a few drinks, have a good time. They decide whether you're okay to see their Christmas tree light recycling factory, and if you are, they then take you to see it. So these people became my friends. The Lee family became my friends, and they said, after this very long lunch, let's go see the Christmas tree light recycling factory. I'm going to show you a video of how Christmas tree lights are recycled in China. Just a couple of things. This is one factory in China that recycles around 2 million pounds of Christmas tree lights per year. So you think about a million kilos of Christmas tree lights per year. It's one of 10 in a small village outside of Qingyuan that does this. Huge volumes. It may very well be the Christmas tree light recycling capital of the world. I'm going to talk over it. The one thing to keep in mind is it's just the principle of how they do this. The technology is like panning for gold, taojin, okay? You're just panning for gold. The heavier, the gold goes in one place, the sand goes in another. The person who designed this is Raymond Lee's nephew, who went to a technical university here in Guangdong province, and he got many offers from engineering firms. He said, you know what, I don't want to be an engineer. I want to go where the money is. I want to go into junk. So I'm going to play this, and I'm going to talk you through how this is done, and I think you'll be quite impressed by this. Okay, step number 1. You need to chop up the Christmas tree lights. So he's throwing the Christmas tree lights into this shredder. That's not smoke, that's steam. You have water pouring in here to keep it cool, because the blades are turning very, very fast to chop this stuff into small pieces. It comes out, and you have copper, insulation, glass, and plastic. You put that onto this table. Now the table is tilted upwards and shaking, and water is shooting up it. The plastic and the glass are very light. It goes off the side. The copper, which is worth about $2.10 US cents per pound, goes off to the right because it's heavy. Okay, so the plastic you can see is going right off the table, and there's the copper, and that's the money. Very, very simple. It's high-tech, but it's low-tech. I love it. And you're going to see how clean this is. These are Christmas tree lights. They start at Christmas tree lights, and as the camera pans down, you're going to see it turns into how great is that? People tell me in the United States all the time, Chinese people can't innovate. I say, bullshit. Here's innovation for you. Okay? It's a brilliant system. It's good for the environment because that water that's used in it, it just goes through that system round and round and round. It's good for the economy because China needs raw materials. It needs copper. It needs plastic. And it needs jobs. China does this better than anybody in the world. It's the world's #1 recycling hub. Fantastic. What happens to the copper? Well, let me tell you first what happens to the plastic. Raymond, as I mentioned earlier, he will sell everything that comes out of here. The plastic actually goes to a factory that makes shoe soles, okay? Shoe soles. So you can be walking on last year's Christmas. The copper, very, very smart. The copper goes back to a Christmas tree light recycling factory, which exports the Christmas tree lights back to the United States. In other words, China's making money on the whole cycle, and the Americans are paying you twice. Not bad. All right. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that this is a wonderful industry in all cases. Most people, when I talk about this industry, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in China, whether it's in Africa, Europe especially, they always bring up what happens to electronic scrap. They'll always ask me, what happens to my iPhone after I recycle it? And most of them, and I think everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about, they think about pictures from a place in Guangdong called Guiyu, where people will set the electronics on fire, use chemicals that are very hazardous, dump the chemicals into the river, all kinds of unsafe practices both for the environment and for people. I've spent a lot of time in Guiyu, I've spent a lot of time in Guangdong looking at these various types of factories. This is one not far from Guiyu where you can see a lot of electronic scrap that's been imported from the United States. What's going to happen to it? Well, up until about 5 years ago, it was pretty bad. Maybe 6 years ago, it's 2016, not 2015. It was pretty bad. You would see a lot of burning. You would see a lot of chemicals being thrown into the water. Some of that stuff still will happen. I'm not going to tell you this is all good. Anytime people are cleaning up somebody else's mess, you're going to have problems. But the interesting thing is there's a lot more ingenuity and a lot more smarts to this business than just setting things on fire and using chemicals. The people who do this work aren't in it to hurt their health. They're in it to make money, and they figured out how to make money. And this is the story that often doesn't get told about these electronic scrap imports that some people say are dumped on China. So let's go to Guiyu briefly, a few slides here. This is the chip market in Guiyu. Now you're saying to yourself, wait, chip market? Guiyu? What the heck is that? Well, you have this sort of thing in Shenzhen too. I mean, this is the capital of chip markets. What are they doing with it? Well, in Guiyu, they figured out, okay, you can take this phone, if it's not working anymore, and you can set it on fire, and you can get the copper, and you can get the gold, and the copper and the gold are worth a few cents. Or, if it's broken, what if you open it up and look for the pieces inside it that can be reused and resold? Not turned into, pieces of gold, but actually be reused. This is what they actually do there. This is where 80% of the money in electronics recycling is. You cut out the usable parts. What's worth more, a phone chip that works, or the value of it in terms of the little tiny grains of gold in it? Well, of course, it's this. And this is an extraordinary business. What happens to all these chips? Well, first of all, think about it. If China is receiving and generating millions of phones, millions of old computers, and most of them are going into, Guiyu, you're going to have thousands of chips that are similar. That's inventory. That's something you can sell. So Guiyu, for example, supplies China's toy industry. And Shantou, which is close to Guiyu is actually part of Shantou, is the world's toy manufacturing capital. And a lot of those toys manufactured in Guiyu are using these reusable chips that have been pulled out of electronics and not burned. It's very, very profitable. And if you go to the chip market, and here's a picture of it late in the day after business is done, you will see enormous business happening. Now, I just want to give you some perspective on this. This chip market in Guiyu, this is one of 9 aisles on the first floor, and there's 5 floors. The other interesting thing is the companies that sell these chips in Guiyu, many of them also have outlets here in Shenzhen. So if you go to Huaqiang, Beilu, and you have the electronics markets there, a lot of them are getting their chips out of Guiyu and selling them from there. At a time when everybody's saying the world and China and the United States need green economies, sustainable economies, circular economies, this isn't something to look down upon. This is something to admire. And, if you're looking for a job, maybe this is the future. I've written a book on this topic, and I think there's some copies being given away today. I just want to close with just one thought for you, and that is this. When you look at the junk men, the junk women, the people you see on the streets, or when you see pictures like I've shown you today or you saw in the opening video, I would ask you, don't pity these people. They don't need your pity. They need your junk. These are, for me, I'm a son, a grandson, a great-grandson of this business. These are my brothers and sisters, and I can tell you there's dignity in the work they do, and there's a future. This is the future. And Shenzhen, where we're speaking today, where we're gathering today, is actually one of the world's hubs for making that future happen. Thank you very much.